Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, yeah.
We're going to do this great show on declaring a foreclosure prevention zone here in Mendocino County. We've got two great guests. We got CJ Holmes and Tim Nonn. Tim is a longtime community organizer. He's also got a PhD in philosophy, and he's been a chaplain in the Tenderloin District, which is what was the basis of his doctoral dissertation. Tim, why don't we start out with you and introducing you to our audience? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, John. When I was working on my doctorate, I worked for 4 years in the Tenderloin District of San Francisco because I wanted to study the way the religious community was responding to the poor, the urban poor. And I served there as a chaplain for people with HIV/AIDS, and then lived in one of the slum hotels for a year to have a full experience.
What was the title of your dissertation?
Oh God, it was so boring and academic, I can't even remember it.
Okay. CJ, tell us a little bit about your long career in real estate.
Well, I'm CJ Holmes, real estate broker, and became involved in real estate because I purchased property as an investor and had this thought that if a smart person who really cared about the results for the client actually did the transactions, the client would make more money. And now I've been able to prove that. I've done hundreds of transactions. But in the process, I've, of course, analyzed the markets in ways that most people don't even think about, and could see in '09, I actually did a little video, it's on YouTube, about rescuing foreclosures, because I could see where we were headed, and turns out that's where we are. We have lost tremendous amounts of equity in the market, and it's not over. A lot of people don't want to hear that, but this is the truth. And so when Tim started Occupy Petaluma and focused on foreclosures, stopping foreclosures, and I read the article in the Press Democrat, that day we got in touch because I said, I have solutions. I know how to solve this problem, but I need somebody to listen. And it's just gone from there.
All right, we're going to get to your solution in a second, and we're going to start out with you, CJ, because you're the real estate expert. Tim, you're the organizer. CJ, earlier this week, as you know, a report came out that we're at a low since the financial crisis started in late 2007. We're at a low in foreclosures, all-time low over the last 3-4 years. And that seems like we're in a complacent state. Can we expect a tsunami of foreclosures, and why?
Well, it's really fascinating that you would call it a low, because I have a chart right here that talks about, if this is low, we still have 6 million homes in the pipeline from 30, 60, 90-day default and foreclosures. That's what a lot of people don't even think about or talk about, is how many people have stopped paying. They're in the pipeline. We don't really see those. They're not counted. They're not talked about very much, but they're there. They're not talking about the additional 5 million. There's 11 million loans upside down in this country, and that's 22% of the loan portfolio of the
Wow.
United States. So just because it's down doesn't mean it's going to stop. And of course, just this week, Tim forwarded articles to me about the ramping up of foreclosures this year, how they're going to take back millions of homes, and also articles that talked about who's actually in charge of deciding how these foreclosures are handled. And that's one of the real concerns we have today.
Well, yeah, also this week during the Christmas break, actually it was 2 weeks ago during the Christmas break, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Fed, who fiercely guards their independence, sent the various financial services committees in Congress a memo warning them of the looming crisis in foreclosures. It was, I believe the memo was called the Foreclosure Crisis, or We a Nation in Denial, and they talked about not just how high unemployment is a serious risk to the economy, but perhaps even a more serious risk to the economy is the impending foreclosure crisis. Very surprising, because again, the Fed hardly speaks at all publicly, hardly initiates any comment, and when they do, it's usually very limited. But in that memo, and I'm quoting from the memo, they're talking about a costly and inefficient foreclosure process. They're talking about problems in the current model for servicing mortgages, and quoting from the memo itself about policies. The adjustment process will take longer, pushing housing prices even lower, thereby prolonging the downward pressure on the wealth of the current homeowner and the resultant drag on the recovery at large. Wow, what do you think, CJ?
Well, I think exactly. He's exactly right. I'm glad somebody is speaking up, because at this point, for the last 2.5 years, I feel that nobody has addressed the problem. The fact of the matter is, with housing prices now down so far below construction cost, that's why we have such high unemployment. Every plumber, electrician, painter, developer, and all the people that did underground work and all the retail supplies for building houses is completely gone. There's a few buildings, of course, but the majority, the vast 75% of the construction industry was decimated. So that cannot come back until we get our housing values back. Now, the fact, if you look at my site, www.occupy-our-homes.info, you can read simple explanations, how the crash started, what's happened to the values in the property. For example, in Mendocino County, since 2008, the average home price has dropped 43%. The average home price now is $239. It was $421.
Wow.
The median has dropped 36%, of $124,000. And last year, in 2011, 68% of the sales were distressed. And what people don't count, and I'm trying to get this news out, every time a homeowner loses a home to foreclosure or short sale, they cannot get a loan to buy a home, even if they have good credit, good cash reserves, and a good job, they can't get a loan for 3 years. At this time, if you just count the last 36 months in the 11 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area, which would include Mendocino, there's over 82,000 families that can't get a loan, and this market only sells 55,000 homes a year. So we're 18 months of locking buyers out. So if you don't have the buyers, you can't sell the houses. You have to keep lowering the prices.
Right, right. Tim, we're going to shoot to you. As a community organizer, what are progressives doing?
Well, the first thing and the most important thing that people have to understand is that the foreclosure crisis is a crime scene, and that Wall Street has created the perfect scheme to kill the American dream. And unless you understand that, you're going to continue to be afraid and feeling powerless, because we don't have a lot of power in terms of money and staffs. I mean, I had to call my mom this morning to get some information from her about this man who was just appointed the chief of staff last week by President Obama. He's the guy who stands in the doorway and decides who President Obama talks to. This man, Jacob Liu, was formerly the chief operating officer at Citigroup for the Alternative Investments Unit, and what that odd name means is that he was betting against the housing crisis. So they got us into this mess, they crashed the economy, and now they've occupied the White House. Wall Street has occupied the White House, and at the same time, the agency that President Obama set up to solve the foreclosure crisis, which is called the Federal Housing Finance Agency, the director's office is empty. So the person who's supposed to be protecting us homeowners, protecting the American dream, that office is empty while Wall Street has occupied the White House. And so we have to understand that this crime scene is still going on, and there's only one way we can stop this, because we can't expect Wall Street and the government to solve this crisis. They're not going to solve this crisis. Only communities are. So we've created this model at occupypetaluma.com of the foreclosure prevention zone. The basic idea is that the community is the solution. you know, we all suffer from this disease of rugged individualism in the West. But until we come together as communities, we're not going to be able to save our homes. And it's not right just to blame the homeowners for making mistakes. I was foreclosed by Wells Fargo about 1.5 years ago. And sure, maybe I made mistakes, but 20 million Americans didn't make mistakes, including those people whose homes values have gone down. Did they make mistakes? Did the cities throughout California who are suffering so greatly because of loss of tax revenues because of the foreclosure crisis, are they to blame? No, this was the perfect scheme concocted by Wall Street to kill the American dream, and unless we understand that, we're not going to be able to solve it.
Well, I often take the devil's advocate position on this show, so I'm going to fire away here. When you say Wall Street killed the American dream, Wall Street doesn't do anything unless there's a profit motive. When Wall Street kills the American dream, who's making money?
We see this as 3 steps. The first step was they created toxic loans. They simply did not do underwriting. They threw money away because it wasn't theirs. So they packaged these pools of loans. They're called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, which were sold on Wall Street. And when you think of the people that bought, I like to think of our pension funds, because those are the entities that bought this. So it's a triple whammy. The pension fund is losing value. We're losing value in our homes. And then, of course, insiders like Tim pointed out, Jacob Lew, with the banks betting against the failure of these collateralized debt obligations. They made millions of dollars in that process. Now we see the third step. Oh, the White House and the government, they do have a solution, but it's a really scary one. 2 articles came out this week. One is government set to sell foreclosures in bulk, and they're going to be selling to the private hedge funds. So what we see happening.
I want you to say more about that. Again, Wall Street only does something if they make money at it, and we've seen in deregulation just the proliferation of swaps and derivatives, credit default swaps, credit collateralized debt obligations, as you talk about, as you just mentioned, as collateralized mortgage obligations, tranches of mortgages. Yes. The consequences are undercapitalized banks that are doing very little risk management, and in some cases outright bank fraud. And this is not just contained to the United States of America, but because the financial system and financial markets are truly global in nature, it's now extending to the Eurozone and dragging down the European economy, which is what's beaten down the market lately, all as a result of deregulation. Explain how a hedge fund makes money with these obligations. What you just said, elaborate on it.
Well, they're not going to be buying the CDOs.
Correct.
They're buying the foreclosures, the Fannie and Freddie properties that they foreclosed on. So they are making a deal with the president to buy tens of thousands of homes, and they will just be a landlord. They will collect rent.
Wow.
Out of these people that now can't get a loan because they have a foreclosure on their credit. So they're locked out. These people call me. They say, do you have any properties for sale with seller financing? They're trying to buy a home, but they're locked out. So while the banks lock them out with the rules, and the reason the banks do that is FHA rules. It's government rules that the banks are following because they are scared to death. If they make a loan, they can't wholesale it unless they follow the rules. So you've got these big pressures. They've locked the people out. Now they're going to give the foreclosures to a hedge fund who can now make gobs of money renting to them. But the kicker is the appreciation, because when the market does recover, when it comes back into balance, we're calculating the gain to be at least 100,000. Let me tell you, I'm looking right now for investor clients in Solano County. The houses are $80,000. You can rent them for $1,200 a month, and you have to insure them for $180,000 because that's what it would cost to replace. So if you multiplied 1 million foreclosed homes given to the hedge funds, and they all, balanced out when the market recovers at 100,000 gain, you're talking $1 trillion.
Tim, I'm tempted to pontificate at this point. I mean, we've seen here America losing basically their homes. If you couple that with the attack on unions that we've seen and the loss of collective bargaining rights by many unions across the country, we're looking at the death of the middle class.
Right.
Am I pontificating? Am I being too much of a knee-jerk liberal here, or did I get it right?
Yeah, you got it right. I mean, that's what people have got to wake up to, is that the middle class is being destroyed in the United States, and mainly because middle income people, most of their wealth is in their homes. It's not, they don't have a lot of stocks and bonds like the rich.
Right.
The poor can't afford homes. So when Wall Street developed this perfect scheme to kill the American dream, basically they said, let's look at the wealth of the middle class. How can we take that away from them? They're turning the country into a nation of renters, and rents are going up. And people can barely survive. I know people who are dropping out of the middle class right and left. I know local bankers in Petaluma who've been foreclosed. I know people in charge of foreclosure prevention programs are being foreclosed. I know retired clergy who are being foreclosed. It's affecting everyone, and it affects everyone in a different way, whether your home is underwater or you're being foreclosed or you lose your job or your small business goes under because people are moving out of the community. We have to understand that until we learn to come together as a community, we're not going to be able to solve this problem.
Before the show, we got a call from our good friend Norman Duvall, who is opposite me every other Friday. And CJ, you spoke to him, I think, correct?
Yes.
And we were talking about how banks may be incentivized, actually, to foreclose. Explain that to our listeners.
Well, I'll try to simplify it. When the banks sold these loans to the collateralized debt obligations, they kept the servicing rights, so the banks are the middlemen. And this is something that a lot of people don't quite understand. They say to me, well, I keep calling them, and why won't they work with me? Well, because it's not their money. They are servicing a note in default, and every month that goes by, they get more money for it out of the end result. Eventually, if you just take a property, oh, by the way, for loan modifications, did you know that the banks are paid to consider the loan mod, not do it? This is why they tend to deny you and then try to incentivize you to reapply. Every time you reapply, ka-ching, they get $1,000 from the government out of our pockets. So anyway, back to the banks will tend to not deny loan mods, and finally they foreclose. They get the servicing fees, they get the property management fees, they get part of the commission fees for selling the house, and all of that money comes out of the net proceeds to the actual owner of the note, which is the CDO investors, our pension funds. So they are basically playing both sides against, they're in the middle. They're keeping as much as they can for themselves. We call it extend and pretend, because they lobbied the government and got the government to agree that they did not have to market their portfolios. So they have these millions of loans that are all underwater, but they can pretend that they're still worth the value that they loaned on them. However, on Main Street, every time that appraiser comes out and says that house is now worth X, that shaves the equity off of everybody in that neighborhood.
Right. You know, I was going to ask a little bit later in the show, but now that we've stumbled upon the issue, I wanted to talk about the loan modification program that the Obama administration enacted into law and believes is the magic bullet. By my way of thinking, the two big loan originators, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, sold the loans to investors. And for that reason, homeowners don't qualify for these workouts and this restructuring and the loan modifications. Do I have that right, Tim?
Yeah, but I think CJ can address that better than me.
Okay.
But that's right.
See, I think that Fannie and Freddie bought those notes. They were the wholesaler purchasers. So they own that. That's why they have such heartburn and are so upside down. And that's why the government says, oh my goodness, what are you going to do with all these homes? One of my solutions is that they would actually sell those homes to those people that can't qualify for a bank loan, rather than giving those homes over to a hedge fund to net the spread on and to make the appreciation. Do some Fannie Freddie seller financing so that the people that qualify to pay the mortgage, they just have a foreclosure or short sale ding, so they don't qualify for a bank loan. Let them buy one of these foreclosures so that they can get back into home ownership. That would actually save our communities, save our property tax revenues, keep people in the homes, would help reduce some of that rental pressure. Of course, it would take the profits away from the hedge fund guys. I'm all for that.
Well, you'd be taking Bain Capital. I think they're in the business too. We tend not to want to politicize our show, but we have candidates for the White House who are profiting. Tim?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because lately Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich have been accusing Mitt Romney of being a vulture capitalist. And so I think most of us aren't against capitalism. We're just against vulture capitalism, which is pushing people out of their homes. And we're trying to figure out, and we're not experts. I mean, I can barely keep up with CJ. She's, such an expert on foreclosure prevention. But, and my background is in ethics, so I'm learning slowly about all these things. But what I know is that people are good. People are generally good. That's what I know. And most people have a capacity for love. So we're not just talking about anger toward the banks. We're dealing very closely with Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo's reached out to us, and they've helped us find ways to keep people in their homes. So we're not broad brushing all the banks. Some of them are really good, especially the community-based banks like Redwood Credit Union. So we don't want to just operate out of anger. We want to operate out of love. And one thing I learned in working in the Tenderloin is that it's really easy to label people. You say, okay, these poor people are criminals. So when you apply for food stamps, all your data goes into the criminal justice system to see if you have an outstanding warrant. And a lot of times poor people are being labeled as criminals. And so we could say, well, everyone who's lost their home is morally wrong. They messed up in some ways. But it's really, it's a system. It's like a impersonal machine that's chewing up all these homeowners. And really, I feel like the only way to solve this is to learn to love one another. You might not like going down and getting out in the streets and meeting some of your neighbors to work on this, but that's what you need to do. You need to go to the Facebook page of Occupy Mendocino and go and meet some of these folks. And that's what we did in Petaluma. We're learning to work together as strangers to learn how to become neighbors.
That's an interesting point, Tim, because in the Occupy Wall Street movement, they were actually joining the those who you would expect to be demonstrating. A lot of times were the younger people who worked on Wall Street. I've always described myself, I've had a 30-year career on Wall Street, I've always described myself as a blue-collar worker on Wall Street. Traders are blue-collar workers. I worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange for Spear Leeds and on the floor of the COMEX and the Merck for Merrill Lynch. And even when I was wearing a white collar, when I went into institutional sales and product management, if there was, Wall Street works on a boom-bust cycle. They go on hiring binges, and then with every bear market they purge. So, my career, I'd get hired, you make a lot of money, there's a bear market, I got laid off, and it starts all over again. Again, you can't label, I don't think you can label all of Wall Street. You can certainly label the 1%, but not everyone who works on Wall Street is the 1%. That is for darn sure, and I'm here to testify to that. We're talking about creating a foreclosure-free zone here in Mendocino County. We're talking to CJ Holmes, a real estate expert, and Tim Nonn, a community organizer. We're talking about that $7 trillion in home equity has disappeared since 2006. That's more than half of the home equity in the United States. How does this loss affect our nation's net worth? How does it play into high unemployment? We know that it does because the Federal Reserve just sent a memo out to the Financial Services Committee in the House and the Banking Committee in the Senate, warning of this crisis. And then immediately following that, you had a governor of the Federal Reserve, Betsy Duke, also speaking to that memo, and you had two presidents of Fed branches, the one in New York and the one in Boston, echoing what that memo said. We want to get to solutions. Tim, I want to talk as a community organizer, and we'll get to you, CJ, because you're a little bit more technical, what workouts look like and what restructuring look like, and maybe what new laws should look like. But Tim, as an organizer, where do I go for? I leave the studio. Where do I go from here? I go to Fort Bragg on Sunday and I hook up with the Occupy Mendocino people. What do I do?
Okay, we've created a model for the foreclosure prevention zone on our website, occupypetaluma.com. There's a tab that says Foreclosure Crisis. So we've spelled it all out there on how to create a foreclosure prevention zone in your community. If we can get cities in Sonoma County and Mendocino County to declare themselves foreclosure prevention zones, and for instance in Petaluma the city council is going to pass a resolution on supporting that, then we can go to the boards of supervisors in these two counties. If that happens, we can give the whole state a model and then the whole country a model. And I think a lot of times people feel powerless, that the first hurdle they have to overcome is feeling like nothing they will do will make any difference. And I can tell you, when I was foreclosed a year and a half ago, I didn't tell anybody, not even people in my church, about it because I was so ashamed. I felt like I had failed my family and my son. And I'm sure some people feel like I did that, but I kept quiet. And a lot of these people who are being foreclosed, they hide.
Shame.
Out of shame, right. But when the Occupy movement came along, all of a sudden I found my voice. And that's the power that we have, is we find our voices by being in community with one another. And when we find our voice, what can we do with that voice? We can speak truth. We can say it's wrong for Wall Street to occupy the White House and Congress. It's wrong to leave that office empty at Federal Housing Finance Agency, who's supposed to solve the foreclosure crisis for homeowners. We can speak the truth and to power, and the truth has a lot of power, and we've got to learn as communities to say to government and the banks and Wall Street, you can't just expect us to keep silent and to disappear. We're not going away because we love our communities.
Excellent answer. I'm speechless. CJ, let's talk about more of the technical answer to this problem. How can we stop this tsunami of foreclosures that we can expect? We talked about the deregulation of Wall Street. How can we re-regulate this the mortgage industry?
Well, I do know two things. Number one, the banks and the government do not like negative media attention. And so the very first thing we need to do, I think two things. Each individual needs to just send an email to me at occupy@cjholmes.com and pick a plan. I have 5 solutions. These plans would keep people in their homes, number one, would put people that have been foreclosed back into a home, would allow those people that are upside down to refinance at current market rates so they could keep their home. And if the home foreclosure is still vacant, I believe that owner should be reinstated into that house. Now, the fact is, on Monday, we read that the government is ready to do, the White House, a trial program of selling hundreds of thousands of homes, Fannie and Freddie foreclosures, to large investment funds, like hedge funds. It says a pilot sales program will be starting in the very near future. So I love foreclosure prevention zones. We need to do that, but to get city councils to meet and pass resolutions takes time. I don't think we have the time. I think we need an outpouring of thousands of people demanding one of these solutions, because then we can tap the media and we could say, look, 10,000 people, 100,000, 1,000,000 people want to keep their homes. So administration, stop, cease and desist, stop what you're doing, let us work out a plan so that we can keep our real estate rather than selling it off to the rich.
So you have 5 workout solutions on your website.
Yes,
And
it's on the homepage.
And what's that site again?
Occupy-our-homes.info. And the plans are basically, 1, the owners be allowed to buy their home short. Right now, anybody on the planet except the owner, their family, and a terrorist can buy a property short. It can be cash from Saudi Arabia, no offense, but anybody can buy it except the owner. That is so wrong. The owner should have first chance to buy their home short. And trust me, everybody I talk to agrees. They would actually even pay more than market value to keep the home.
Okay,
People love their homes.
So that's solution number 1. Solution number 2.
Owner loans to be modified with a principal reduction to market value. Because the fact of the matter is, what good is it if your interest rate is lowered a point for 5 years when you still owe $500,000 on a property that's now worth $300,000? People are going to say that doesn't make any sense. So that's number 2. Number 3, there's a whole bunch of middle-class people. By the way, that 6 million loans that are in default, half of them are prime. We're not talking subprime, we're not talking neg-ams, we're not talking alt-A, pick-a-pay type properties and loans. We're talking about prime, middle-class homeowners. And they're looking at each other and they're saying the same thing. They're saying, am I a chump for paying my mortgage? Because my house is several $100,000 upside down. What hope do I ever have that it will ever come back to that value?
Next solution.
So if their current loan is upside down, they want to be able to refinance at the current market rate.
Makes sense.
And then the 4th solution for those that were foreclosed and their house is sitting vacant, because trust me, no matter what the banks say to the media, there are millions of homes that are vacant. One article I read was 18 million in the nation. They're vacant homes. These banks don't want to list them because they're afraid they're going to swamp the market. I think that if the owner lost the home, they ought to have a chance to be reinstated, get their house back.
And the 5th solution?
All those people that got locked out, their homes are now gone, they've been sold to somebody else, they can't get a loan because of their 3-year forced wait, that if they qualify to actually make a payment, and a loan on a home is going to be cheaper, the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance price would be cheaper than rent. So they ought to be allowed to buy.
Wow. Tim?
Yeah, I have something people can start doing right away. Is I said previously that Wall Street has occupied the White House and Congress. This is literally true. That Wall Street told President Obama, we want you to appoint the guy who crashed the economy because of the housing crisis as your chief of staff. They ordered him to appoint this guy as his chief of staff. At the same time, Jacob Lew.
Jacob Lew.
From Citigroup. At the same time, Obama is leaving the office at the agency who's supposed to fix the foreclosure crisis empty. Now, the California delegation this week has told President Obama he needs to appoint a permanent director. There's a temporary director, Edward DeMarco. People need to call the White House and tell them, don't just take orders. This is, let's say the truth here. I was talking about the truth. This is pure political corruption. That Wall Street has corrupted Congress and the White House. They gave President Obama I'm a Democrat, and I'm angry at what's going on. They gave him $68 million in the last few weeks, and then all of a sudden he appoints this guy. This is political corruption. And we need to demand, along with the California delegation, that they put somebody in charge of the agency who's supposed to fix the foreclosure crisis, and don't just take orders from Wall Street, take orders from the American people.
Well, let's talk about California. California has been devastated by the foreclosures and the drop in property values. Its budget has been shot to pieces because of the fall in both income taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes. Why hasn't Governor Brown and the state legislature offered some leadership on solving the foreclosure process?
He's been pretty silent. And a report that CJ has there says every foreclosed home costs cities and counties about $25,000 to $35,000 for foreclosure processing fees, sheriff evictions, lost utility bills that aren't paid, and so the banks foreclose a home, and then us taxpayers have to pay for that expense, and then city services are cut back, and in Petaluma we got lots of potholes that aren't being filled.
I don't know why our elected leaders have not come up with more solutions, but I do know this. Lots and lots and lots of people don't really understand the problem and don't have a solution. We're given solutions. Here, we can fix this. So maybe they'll get behind us and help support it.
Okay, here's my thought too about county government, and just tell me whether I'm off base. Local governments probably pick up the biggest part of the tab for foreclosures. Not only do you have a dramatic drop in property values, but you have a corresponding drop in property taxes, and for every foreclosure you have an average of $20,000 that's spent in blighted properties, trash removal, inspections, unpaid utility bills, sheriff evictions, and so forth and so on. It seems to me that maybe counties across California should declare themselves foreclosure free zones?
Yes.
Absolutely, and everybody in every county, in every city, in every state, in this whole country should rise up, even property owners that aren't at risk of losing their properties. They need to help declare foreclosure prevention zones, otherwise all their equity is gone too. We're all sliding down the hill, and again, if we don't stop it, then we're all just facing this devastation.
So even if you're some fat cat, this foreclosure crisis is affecting you.
Well, if you're a real fat cat, then you just want it to keep devastating so
Okay.
that you can buy it.
But like say you're, I don't know, a doctor or a lawyer or another professional, and your neighbors are being foreclosed on. You say, oh, all right, I live in a state of denial. But that's not true, because your property values are falling too, and with that, taxes are falling and county services are falling. True?
Absolutely, and unfunded pension liabilities, because the pension funds bought this stuff.
Oh, we didn't even go there yet.
and so truly, I mean, Sonoma County is just in a
Yes.
world of hurt, because regardless of the fact that some of the people in the county government, voted themselves some really nice pension benefits that they're now trying to figure out how to unwind. The fact is, we have all this pension fund unfunded liabilities because the values dropped. We lost millions of dollars.
Right.
Everybody has everywhere.
Don't get me started. I've done this show for 4 years. That's been a constant theme. What a lot of people don't know is that the biggest pension plans, like CalPERS and CalSTARS, have been the biggest buyers of collateralized mortgage obligations and debt obligations. So they're holding the bag on this stuff. Meanwhile, the guys that sold it to them, like Goldman Sachs, have sold short the very same securities. In other words, they're profiting as...
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's crazy. We're going to take a couple of calls, and we're speaking with Timothy Nonn, a member of Occupy Petaluma, freelance writer, author of many articles, essays, also a poet, and a former pastor, or maybe he's still a pastor. He's a pastor in this studio right now, as far as I'm concerned. There are not that many guys who talk about truth and love on this show, but we're doing it today. Editor of several books, has a PhD in ethics, a long history of community organizer. He is also, and we didn't talk about it, perhaps because he's too modest, he's been a national organizer in 2 social movements, the Sanctuary Movement from 1981 to 86, and the Darfur Movement, 2004 to 2008. We were also speaking with real estate expert CJ Holmes, has worked in the industry since 1996, believes that 8 million homes have already foreclosed, another 6 million are in the pipeline. That much of this country will not belong to the citizens by the time the hedge funds own their properties. We have 2 wonderful websites that both of our guests have that we'll get back to, but first I want to take a couple of calls. Listener, you're on the line.
Yeah, hi, this is John Lawala. I'm a
Good morning, John.
Good morning, and I wonder what should I be advocating to solve this foreclosure crisis that I have a congressional candidate?
Good question. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Well, ask President Obama to appoint a permanent director of the Federal Finance Housing Agency for starters.
And stop him from his trial program of selling foreclosures to hedge funds.
Do you think every candidate will embrace that agenda, John?
Well, let's listen. Sunday evening, I'm going up to a debate. I hope we all get on the same page. I thought maybe we should stop this law that says you have to wait 3 years after you're foreclosed before you can actually buy another place and get a loan.
Well, I hope you've taken some notes from the show and raised all these issues.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. That's what I want to do back there. And I'm going to see if I can convert all the other candidates to the same thing.
Absolutely, and get everybody you ever talk to at least sign up. If we can have thousands, millions of people on the list, then we have some voice. They'll listen to us. Absolutely.
Thank you for your call, John.
All right.
Listener, you're on the air. Good. Let's keep repeating these websites. I know we need to.
The solutions are occupy-our-homes.info and
OccupyPetaluma.com and click the Foreclosure Crisis tab.
And doesn't Occupy Mendocino have a Facebook page too?
Right. Yeah, www.facebook.com/Occupy Mendocino.
Yeah, right on. All right, thank you, Al.
I want to say on the occupyourhomes.info, on the home page, right under the sign up to keep your home, because I basically said it's simply request to keep the home, add community clout, get ready to pass state laws. Under A is a little link that you can just print a flyer. Print the flyer and pass it out. Stand in front of Safeway and give it to everybody.
We're the calls are pouring in. Let's keep at it. Listener, you're on the air.
Good morning. A point and a question. The point is that Bill Black, who many people know about, a former bank regulator who's now a professor in the Midwest, has repeatedly said that every step on the way is a fraud, from the origination of the mortgages to the overinflation of values that made the loans higher to the foreclosure prices. It's all a massive fraud. And he wants to keep using the term liar loan because that's pretty much
That's correct.
Anyway, the question is, in the origination of a lot of these mortgages and passing them up through the pipeline to Wall Street, many of the banks and brokers use the mortgage electronic registration system of MERS. And what this did was it was an antitrust about paying various cities and county taxes and fees that help pay mortgages for originated. And so, what would be the possibility of some sort of class action lawsuit in which counties all got together and said, look, we lost out $1 million fees for these guys, and now we're taking it here in the end game where we're having to incur all these expenses because of foreclosure. What are the possibilities of a bunch of aggressive people getting together and filing a class action lawsuit to recover those lost fees? And I'll take my answer off here. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim has got a good answer to that question.
Yeah, you put your finger on a key problem. The 50 attorneys general throughout the United States have been negotiating for over a year with the big 5 banks on the foreclosure fraud. And the Obama administration wants to have a civil settlement for $25 billion that the banks would pay to states for foreclosure fraud. But now California Attorney General Kamala Harris and other attorney generals are saying, no, we want to sue the banks for foreclosure fraud, and including the MERS system, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. So we're hoping that Kamala Harris sticks to her guns and sues the banks for fraud and puts some bank executives and Wall Street executives in jail.
I would like to point out that this is the next horrible problem coming down the pike, and that is the MERS foreclosure, the MERS recording. What you gotta understand is since the banks did that, now that they've taken these properties and they're foreclosing on them, MERS was not always correct. And so we have a tremendous number of these foreclosures actually have clouded title. Most buyers cave in. They use agents that, don't want to fight the system for whatever reason. They use the seller's escrow, and the seller hires attorneys to sign paperwork for them, and they get some title company to insure the title, even though it's clouded. So we're going to have a huge mess down the road because all these people are buying properties. They have no idea that the title is clouded. They're not going to be able to sell.
I want to mention where you can meet our two guests this weekend. On Saturday, you have January the 14th, we have the Occupy General Assembly in Fort Bragg. On Sunday the 15th at 10:30 at the Evergreen Methodist Church at 200 North Corey Street in Fort Bragg. Tim Nonn, from our guest here from Occupy Petaluma, will talk on forgiving our debts. Interesting that, Tim, I wanted to talk about that. The Lord's Prayer is not just forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us, but forgive us our debts. Isn't that true? That those two words, sins and debts, are interchangeable.
Right, yeah, it's been used in different ways, interpreted in different ways, but what Jesus was referring to when he taught his disciples that prayer is the Jubilee year, where every 50 years the debt gets wiped out. And the basic concept, and I'm going to be talking about that at my sermon at the church on Sunday, is that nobody owns all of the earth. It's our gift to share with one another. So the idea is that we get out of balance, and every 50 years maybe we get so out of balance, and 1% own most of the property and 99% are debtors. And this is a way of restoring the balance within ourselves as individuals and society.
For more information about Tim's sermon, go to Occupy Mendocino Foreclosure Committee, and I'll give out their number, and that's 964-3711. On Sunday the 15th, on Martin Luther King celebration at the Casper Community Center, which is located at 15051 on Casper Road. There will be a hot lunch served at the Casper Community Center, and at 1 p.m. Tim will be speaking on the injustice of the foreclosure crisis. Donations requested, but no one will be turned away for lack of funds. Needed 1 or 2 people to help pull materials together. On Sunday the 15th from 3 to 5, the Occupy movement will be occupying the banks protest at Main and Alder in Fort Bragg. Let's see, on Tuesday the 17th at 6 p.m. there will be a sign-making night for the Occupy the Courts protest on January 21st at noon in front of Bank of America in Fort Bragg. Cardboard and paint will be provided for those interested in making a sign. Bread and soup available for participants. RSVP Agnes at 937-2377, and right here at KZYX and this is all connected because we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the Supreme Court's disastrous ruling in the Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. Right here on the Corporations and Democracy show, they will feature national and local activists discussing the 2-year-old United Citizens Supreme Court decision. I'm a big fan of that show. I almost always listen to it. Great show, and it'll be on this disastrous Supreme Court decision. And on Friday the 21st, the Occupy Courts protest will be in front of the Bank of America in Fort Bragg. Join in protesting the 2-year anniversary of this disastrous Supreme Court ruling that allows corporations to spend unlimited funds in trying to influence not just our elections, but our banking laws and our mortgage laws, correct?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And then the final thing I wanted to mention on the state level, there's a rally to overturn Citizens United Saturday the 21st from 1 to 3 p.m. at the California State Capitol Building at 1315 10th Street, Sacramento. The rally is critical to building momentum for the Assembly Joint Resolution 22. We were talking about why the void in leadership at the state on some of these issues. Well, here's Assembly Joint Resolution 22, a bill before the California State Legislature which calls on the United States Congress to ratify and to send to the states an amendment that would overturn Citizens United and, quoting the bill, the resolution, restore constitutional rights and fair elections to the people, thus ending corporate personhood and allowing limitations on all forms of spending. California could be the second state after Hawaii to proclaim its legislature stands ready and eager to ratify a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United. Again, that's Rally to Overturn Citizens United, Saturday the 21st from 1 to 3 p.m. at the California State Capitol Building, 1315 10th Street, Sacramento, California. I want to, before we leave, and the phone calls just keep coming in, so maybe we'll have you back. Is that possible?
Sure, and I'd just like to say one thing to any listeners who might be facing foreclosure. I've gone through that process. I collaborated with Wall Street by disappearing myself and not speaking out because I was ashamed. I just want to say to you, you have nothing to be ashamed of. Don't let your shame and your fear keep you isolated and disappeared. Join together with the people who are working on creating a foreclosure prevention zone in Mendocino. Come forward, find your voice, find your power in truth and love.